The gunshot echoed across the prairie as Matthew Dawson dropped to his knee, scanning the horizon for any sign of movement among his cattle. It wasn't uncommon for rustlers to try their luck with his herd, especially in the spring of 1873 when the railroad had pushed deeper into Wyoming Territory, making stolen cattle easier to transport. The sun hung low in the western sky, casting long shadows across the rolling grassland as Matthew's keen eyes caught a flash of movement near the small creek that bordered his grazing land. "Easy now," he whispered to his horse, a sturdy palomino that had carried him through 3 seasons of cattle drives. Matthew tightened his grip on his Winchester rifle and moved forward cautiously, expecting to find a coyote or perhaps a desperate drifter. What he discovered instead stopped him cold. Huddled against the trunk of a cottonwood tree was a young woman, no more than 20 years old, clutching a small bundle to her chest. Her dress was torn and muddied, her dark hair falling in tangled waves around a face both beautiful and terrified. As Matthew approached, the bundle in her arms moved, revealing the tiny face of an infant. "Don't come any closer," the woman warned, her voice hoarse but determined as she reached for something at her side, a small pistol, Matthew realized. Though her hand trembled so badly he doubted she could hit him even at this range. "Madam, I mean you no harm," Matthew said softly, setting his rifle down and raising his hands to show they were empty. "This is my land, and those are my cattle you're hiding beside. I heard a shot." "That was me," she admitted, the pistol still pointed vaguely in his direction. "A snake. I thought it might hurt my daughter." Matthew nodded slowly, taking in the woman's exhausted appearance. Her cheeks were hollow, her eyes sunken with fatigue, but there was a fierceness there too, the look of someone who had endured too much but refused to surrender. "My name is Matthew Dawson. I have a ranch about 2 miles east of here." He gestured toward the distant silhouette of buildings against the darkening sky. "You and your little one look like you could use some food and shelter." The woman's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "Why would you help us? You don't know who I am or what trouble might follow me." Matthew slowly knelt down, keeping his movements deliberate. "I know you're a mother with a baby out here alone, and night's coming on. That's all I need to know right now." He paused, his voice softening. "This is your home now if you want it to be, at least until you decide where you're headed next." The woman's composure cracked, a single tear trailing down her dirt-streaked face. "I'm Catherine Turner," she said finally, "and this is Emma." "Well, Miss Catherine, why don't you let me help you up on my horse? Emma looks mighty small to be out in the night air." That evening, as Matthew stoked the fire in the stone hearth of his modest ranch house, he watched Catherine feed her daughter with a tenderness that stirred something deep within him. It had been 4 years since he'd returned from the war to build this place. 4 years of solitude broken only by occasional visits from neighboring ranchers or the hands he hired during roundup season. "I can't stay long," Catherine said suddenly, as if reading his thoughts. "There are people looking for us." Matthew didn't press her, merely nodded and continued preparing a simple supper of beans, biscuits, and coffee. "You're welcome here as long as you need, Miss Turner. I've got a spare room upstairs that hasn't seen much use." "Why are you being so kind to strangers?" Catherine asked, her voice laced with lingering suspicion. Matthew paused, memories washing over him of battlefields where he'd seen too much cruelty, of coming home to Wyoming only to find his parents' graves and their half-built dream. "Because someone once showed kindness to me when I needed it most," he said simply. "Sometimes that's all it takes to change a life." As days turned into weeks, Catherine gradually revealed fragments of her story. She had been married to a wealthy cattle baron's son in Colorado Territory, a man whose charm had hidden a violent nature that emerged after their wedding. When Emma was born and her husband's abuse worsened, Catherine had taken her baby and fled north, pursued by men hired to bring them back. "Thomas believes I'm his property, she explained one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in hues of gold and crimson. And Emma too. He'll never stop looking. Matthew's jaw tightened. You're not property, Catherine. Neither is Emma. And this land, this home, is as much yours as mine now. The words surprised them both, hanging in the air between them. But Matthew realized he meant them. In the short time Catherine and Emma had been there, the ranch had transformed from a place where he merely existed to a true home filled with the baby's coos and Catherine's increasingly frequent laughter. As spring deepened into summer, Catherine proved herself far more than a guest. She took over the garden, coaxing vegetables from the stubborn soil that Matthew had all but abandoned. She learned to milk the 2 dairy cows, mended clothes, and even helped with the ranch accounts, revealing an education that surprised Matthew. My father was a schoolteacher before the war, she explained one rainy afternoon as they sat at the kitchen table, ledgers spread before them. He believed women should be educated just as thoroughly as men. Smart man, Matthew replied with a smile that made Catherine's cheeks flush. They settled into a comfortable routine, though both remained aware of the precarious nature of their arrangement. Matthew hired 2 hands to help with the increasing cattle herd brothers named Joseph and Daniel Miller, who lived in the bunkhouse and asked no questions about the woman and child at the main house. Emma grew stronger daily, her curious eyes taking in the world around her. At 7 months old, she began crawling, exploring every corner of the house under Catherine's watchful eye. Matthew found himself storing away small moments. Emma's delighted giggle when he made shadow puppets on the wall, Catherine singing softly as she rocked her daughter to sleep, the 3 of them together in the garden harvesting summer squash. In late July, as thunderstorms rolled across the prairie almost daily, bringing relief from the heat, Matthew realized with startling clarity that he had fallen in love with Catherine. The realization came not in a dramatic moment, but in the simple act of watching her hang laundry on the line, her hair escaping its pins in the breeze, Emma playing with wooden blocks at her feet. Yet he kept his feelings guarded, aware of the wounds Catherine still carried from her marriage and mindful of the uncertain future that hung over them. That uncertainty crystallized into danger one scorching August afternoon when Joseph rode in from town with troubling news. There were men asking questions at the saloon, he reported, his voice low as he stood with Matthew near the corral. 3 of them well armed and flush with cash. They were showing a drawing of a woman that looks mighty like Miss Catherine. Matthew's heart hammered in his chest. What did you tell them? Nothing useful, Joseph assured him. But Mr. Dawson, they're offering $500 for information. Someone's bound to remember that woman who came through with a baby back in April. That night, after Emma was asleep, Matthew told Catherine about the men in town. He expected fear, perhaps panic, but instead found steely resolve in her eyes. I won't run anymore, she said firmly. Emma deserves better than a life spent looking over our shoulders. What are you saying, Catherine? She looked at him directly, her gaze unwavering. I'm saying I want to fight for our freedom. Thomas has no legal right to force me back, not since the new territorial laws about divorce and abandonment. The law might be on your side, Matthew said cautiously, but men like your husband don't always respect the law. No, she agreed. They respect power and money, and fear. She reached across the table and took his hand, her touch sending warmth through him. I'm not afraid anymore, Matthew. Not with you beside me. The confession hung between them, laden with meaning. Matthew turned his hand to clasp hers. I'll stand with you, Catherine, whatever comes. What came was a torrential downpour that turned the roads to mud and kept the bounty hunters at bay for 3 crucial days. During that time, Matthew rode to town despite the conditions and consulted with Judge William Parker, a gruff but fair-minded man who had helped Matthew secure his land claim years earlier. The woman has rights. the judge confirmed after hearing Matthew's carefully edited version of events. If she can prove mistreatment and has established residence here in the territory for 6 months, no Colorado court order can compel her return. And if men try to take her by force? Matthew asked. The judge's weathered face hardened. Then they're not acting as lawful agents but as kidnappers, and you'd be within your rights to defend your household. Armed with this legal reassurance, Matthew and Catherine prepared for the confrontation they knew was coming. Joseph and Daniel were briefed, extra ammunition was distributed, and Catherine practiced with Matthew's spare revolver until she could hit a can at 20 paces without flinching. They didn't have to wait long. 5 days after Joseph's warning, as the morning sun burned away a light fog, 3 riders appeared on the eastern approach to the ranch. Matthew, who had been watching from the barn loft, hurried to the house where Catherine waited with Emma. "They're coming," he said simply. "Are you certain about this?" Catherine nodded, adjusting Emma more securely in her arms. "I'm certain." Matthew touched her cheek gently. "Stay inside with Emma. I'll call if I need you." The 3 men reined in their horses about 50 yards from the house, taking measure of the property. Their leader, a broad-shouldered man with a thick mustache, called out with practiced authority. "I'm looking for Catherine Westfall. I know she's here." Matthew stepped onto the porch, rifle held casually but visibly in his hands. "There's no one by that name here." The man snorted. "Don't play games, rancher. I'm Harrison Reed, acting as agent for Thomas Westfall of the W Ranch in Colorado. His wife and child were seen in these parts." "I believe you're mistaken," Matthew replied evenly. "The only women on this property are Catherine Turner and her daughter, who have been residing here as my guests for the past 4 months. Reed's eyes narrowed at the surname, recognizing Catherine's maiden name. "Turner, is it? Well, that doesn't change the fact that she's a married woman who's stolen her husband's child. We have papers." "I'd be interested to see those papers," Matthew said, "and to hear what Judge Parker in town has to say about their validity in Wyoming Territory." A flicker of uncertainty crossed Reed's face. He hadn't expected legal resistance. "This isn't a matter for territorial courts. It's a family matter. Any matter concerning residents of my household is my concern," Matthew stated firmly. "And I should mention that Miss Turner has filed her own papers with Judge Parker, documenting the circumstances of her departure from Colorado and establishing her residence here." This was stretching the truth. They had discussed such paperwork with the judge but hadn't yet filed anything formal. But the bluff struck home, creating visible doubt among Reed's companions. "Mr. Westfall is prepared to be generous," Reed tried again. "He's offering a substantial reward for the return of his wife and child." Matthew's grip tightened on his rifle. "They're not for sale, Mr. Reed, and they're not going anywhere they don't wish to go." At that moment, the door opened behind Matthew, and Catherine stepped out, Emma secured in one arm and a revolver held steady in her free hand. Her voice carried clearly in the still morning air. "Tell Thomas that Catherine Westfall died the night I left Colorado," she called out. "Tell him Catherine Turner lives here now with her daughter, and any man who tries to change that will answer to Wyoming law and to the men of this ranch." As if on cue, Joseph and Daniel emerged from the barn and the bunkhouse, both armed and positioned to cover the approaching riders from different angles. Reed assessed the situation, clearly reconsidering the ease of his mission. "This isn't over," he warned. "Mr. Westfall doesn't surrender what's his." "I was never his," Catherine replied steadily. "And neither was Emma. The sooner he accepts that, the better for everyone." A tense silence followed before Reed finally nodded curtly to his men. They turned their horses and rode away, dust rising behind them as they disappeared into the distance. Matthew didn't relax until they were completely out of sight. When he turned to Catherine, he found her trembling slightly despite her brave front. "You were magnificent," he said softly. "I was terrified," she admitted, the revolver finally lowering. "But not of them. I was afraid of losing our home. Our home." The words warmed Matthew's heart, but he knew this confrontation was merely the first skirmish in what might be a longer battle. "We should ride into town tomorrow," he suggested. "Make those papers real like I told them. The judge will help us." Catherine nodded, bouncing Emma gently as the baby started to fuss. And then we keep building what we've started here," Matthew said. "If that's what you want." Catherine's eyes met his, a smile slowly forming. "It's what I want more than anything." That night, after Emma was asleep in her cradle, Matthew found Catherine standing on the porch, gazing at the stars that blanketed the clear Wyoming sky. He joined her, their shoulders almost touching as they leaned against the railing. "I never thanked you properly," Catherine said quietly, "for that day by the creek, for everything since." "No thanks needed," Matthew replied. "Having you and Emma here has given me something I didn't even know I was missing." Catherine turned to him, her face softly illuminated by the lantern hanging beside the door. "And what was that?" "Purpose," he said simply. "Family. Hope for something beyond just surviving." He paused, gathering courage. "I've grown to care for you both more than I thought possible." "Matthew," Catherine whispered, her hand finding his on the railing. "I care for you too, more than care. But I'm afraid." "Of what?" "Of trusting these feelings. Of believing I deserve happiness after everything." Matthew gently turned her to face him fully. "Catherine Turner, you deserve every happiness this world has to offer. And if you'll let me, I'd like to spend my days trying to provide it." Their first kiss was tentative, a gentle meeting of lips beneath the vast Wyoming sky. When they parted, Catherine's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "Is this real?" she asked. "After everything, can it be this simple?" Matthew smiled. "Nothing about this has been simple, but some things are clear as day to me now. I love you, Catherine. I love Emma, and I want you both in my life, not as guests or refugees, but as my family." The next morning, they rode into town together, Emma securely bundled against Catherine as they made their way to Judge Parker's office. The legal documents they filed that day would help protect Catherine and Emma from Thomas's claims, but both knew paper alone wouldn't deter a determined man. As summer faded into autumn, they remained vigilant while deepening their commitment to each other and to the ranch. Matthew taught Catherine to ride properly, not side saddle as she'd been trained, but astride like the Western women who worked alongside their men. She proved a natural horsewoman, soon accompanying Matthew on rides to check the cattle that had once been his solitary duty. Emma thrived in the clean mountain air, growing stronger each day. Her first word, "Mama," brought tears to Catherine's eyes. Her second, a gurgled approximation of "Matt," filled Matthew with a pride he couldn't articulate. They received word in late September that Thomas Westfall had been injured in a riding accident, temporarily halting his pursuit. While Catherine expressed no joy at his misfortune, the reprieve allowed them to focus on preparing for winter and on their future together. "I want to marry you," Matthew told Catherine one crisp October evening as they walked among the aspens that blazed golden near the creek where they'd first met. "Not because of Thomas or for protection, but because I love you." Catherine stopped walking, her gloved hand tightening around his. "Are you certain? Taking me as your wife means taking on my past, my troubles." "I've never been more certain of anything," Matthew replied. "Your past made you who you are, the strong, remarkable woman I love. And your troubles became mine the moment I promised you a home." 2 weeks later, on a bright November morning, Catherine Turner became Catherine Dawson in a simple ceremony performed by Judge Parker in the town's small church. Emma, now nearly a year old, sat contentedly in Joseph Miller's arms, occasionally babbling happy nonsense that made the small gathering of witnesses smile. Their wedding night was a revelation for both of them. Catherine, whose only experience had been with a cruel man who took rather than gave, discovered tenderness she hadn't known possible. Matthew, who had known only brief encounters during his army years and cattle drives, found in Catherine a passion that matched his own. "I never knew it could be like this," Catherine whispered as they lay tangled together afterward, the moonlight streaming through the bedroom window casting silver patterns across their skin. "Like what?" Matthew asked, tracing lazy circles on her bare shoulder. "Like coming home," she replied, nestling closer against him. "Even after months of living here, I always felt I was borrowing this life, that it might vanish. But now it's ours," Matthew finished for her. Truly and completely. Winter descended on the Wyoming Territory with its customary ferocity, but the Dawson ranch was well prepared. The root cellar was stocked with preserved vegetables from Catherine's garden, the smokehouse filled with cured meat, and the barn loft overflowing with hay for the livestock. The heavy snows that isolated them from town for weeks at a time became a blessing rather than a hardship, allowing the new family time to settle into their shared life without outside interference. They established new traditions. Reading aloud by the fire each evening, Sunday dinners with Joseph and Daniel invited to the main house, sledding on the gentle slope behind the barn once Emma was old enough to enjoy it bundled in Catherine's lap. News reached them in February, carried by a hardy mail rider who made it through despite the drifts, that Thomas Westfall had died from complications of his injuries. Catherine received the information with a complex mix of emotions: relief that the threat had ended, sadness for the man she had once believed she loved, and guilt that her predominant feeling was freedom. "Does it make me terrible?" she asked Matthew that night. "That I feel mainly grateful it's over?" Matthew pulled her close, understanding her conflicted heart. "It makes you human, Catherine. You can acknowledge his passing without mourning what was never truly good." As winter reluctantly released its grip on the land, other news arrived that changed their lives again. Catherine, who had been experiencing morning sickness for several weeks, confirmed what they had begun to suspect. She was carrying Matthew's child. "Emma will have a little brother or sister by harvest time," she told Matthew one spring morning as they watched Emma toddle after a butterfly in the garden that was beginning to show the first green shoots of the season. Matthew's face lit with a joy that made him look years younger. He knelt beside Emma, sweeping her into his arms. "Did you hear that, little one? You're going to be a big sister." Emma giggled, not understanding but responding to her father's excitement. For Matthew had become her father in every way that mattered, legally adopting her that winter with paperwork Judge Parker had helped prepare. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer months, Catherine's body blossoming as the ranch flourished around them. They expanded the garden, added 2 more dairy cows, and began construction on an addition to the house that would serve as a larger bedroom for the growing family. In late September 1874, just as the first aspens were beginning to turn gold, Catherine gave birth to a healthy boy they named James, after Matthew's father. Emma, now a chattering, curious 2-year-old, approached her baby brother with solemn wonder, gently touching his tiny fingers under Catherine's watchful eye. "Our family," Matthew whispered, gathered beside the bed with his wife and 2 children. "My greatest treasure." As autumn painted the landscape in brilliant hues, the Dawsons hosted a harvest celebration that brought together neighboring ranchers and townspeople. It was a statement as much as a celebration. This was their home, their community, their life firmly established. Catherine, with James cradled in one arm and her other hand resting on Emma's shoulder, stood beside Matthew as they welcomed their guests. Many remarked on how natural they looked together, as if they had always been a family rather than one forged through chance and courage. "Do you ever think about that day by the creek?" Catherine asked Matthew late that night, after the guests had departed and the children were asleep. Often, he admitted, pulling her close as they stood on the porch beneath the starlit sky. I think about how close I came to missing you if I'd ridden in a different direction, if you'd hidden elsewhere. Catherine rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. I was so afraid then, running with no destination, just away from pain. I never imagined I was running toward something wonderful. When I told you this was your home, I had no idea what those words would come to mean, Matthew said. They changed my life as much as yours. They gave us both a second chance, Catherine murmured. A true home. As winter approached once more, the Dawson Ranch stood as a testament to what could grow from that chance encounter, a sanctuary built of love, courage, and the promise kept beside a creek on a spring evening. This is your home now. And so it was, and would remain for generations to come, the place where a desperate woman and her baby had found not just shelter, but love. Where a lonely cowboy had found the family he never knew he was missing. Where home became not just a place, but the people who filled it with laughter, tears, and all the moments that make a life worth living.